Meet me. Welcome back, boys. So, obviously, Ardor season's over. With my last posting, I pretty much uploaded all the junk I had from that season. I still haven't started this season yet, so who knows if the meta will change, but people keep asking me for my opinions on RTA heroes. So this isn't really going to be an official tier list. I'm not going to make a tier list. There's plenty of other people, really good people who have made tier lists and even nice images and stuff, so just Google that. But today I'm going to give you a straightforward video on what units are worth building for RTA. Now, the struggle here is obviously if we could get every hero in the game, that's really easy, but that's not a reality for most of you, especially if you're F2P players. So I decided to break this video down into topics because you know my channel, you know I love doing that. So we're going to go from most accessible to least accessible. So we're going to talk about MLs last. So first we're going to talk about 3-star units that are viable in RTA, and then we're going to talk about 4-star RGBs, 5-star RGBs, and then we're going to finish with the MLs because those are just like dream heroes for many of you. So let's get started, and I'm going to give you real opinion. Like, some of you guys are going to argue with me and say like, oh, well, you said you didn't mention this hero that's really good. I'm going to call you out that I've done a lot of matches last season, and if I don't mention them, it's because I literally never saw them at the high tier. At the high tier, if a hero works well, they're going to draft it. And if I didn't mention your favorite hero, it's because it was literally never drafted at high-end champ or legend. It doesn't really matter what's drafted in Challenger. You could probably beat Challenger with nothing but 3 stars. So with that out of the way, let's get started. So 3-star units. The truth really is that most 3-star units are absolute trash in RTA because their base stats are just not good enough for them to have any impact. What's the exception? The specialty change heroes. So let's just go straight to specialty change because pretty much every 3-star unit that wasn't a specialty change, I never saw it in my last like 300 or 400 matches, except Mursa. Mursa you might run into on a super rare occasion, but in general, even her, she's kind of fallen off, mostly if they need a speed imprint. So Mursa's the one exception. Other than that, the only 3 stars you really need to focus on is number 1, Falconer Clury. Falconer Clury is a very popular early pick, even at the highest tiers. She is just so good. Very high tier hero with her S3 and the fact that with Justice for All, she can just turn cycle, heal herself, give herself immunity, all these crazy things. And she's also a very good closer. Like, if she ends up being the last unit alive, she can solo a lot of things, including Soul Weavers with Battle Frenzy. And anyone can get her, so you really have no excuse not to build this hero. Draftable at the highest tiers. The second is Adventurer Raz. Adventurer Raz is an absolute monster. For many people who are running like offensive comps, like you'll see him paired a lot with like Landies, Ravis, even Archdemon Mercedes, heroes that have really powerful S1s. They like, you can always tell what they're gonna draft. If they pick A-Raz early, they're almost always using like S10A Ravi, Archdemon, something like that, something that has a strong S1, because his S2 is literally spammable. Like, it only takes 10 souls, it can defense break, it's just so strong. And an AoE defense buff is also really powerful. So A-Raz is just a top tier knight, absolutely draftable all the way up to legend, accessible to everybody. No reason not to build this hero either. No excuses. Like, anyone can, you literally start with this hero, so no excuse not to build him. And he's an absolute juggernaut right now. The third is not as obvious and not as popular with everyone, but Doris I have seen drafted at the highest tiers, and she's an absolute beast. Again, the defense buff is crazy, and if you have a tanky bruiser team, the heal is proportional to the target's max health, and the continuous healing, it is big. And against dark heavy teams, she's almost a must ban because she makes it impossible to kill anything. I used to like drafting her into teams that relied on RB as DPS, because she can just tank through RB forever with absolutely no problems. And her S3, relatively short cooldown, is also really like key at bumping CR for that one unit you need to get a turn and really screwing up the enemy rotation. Doris is just extremely powerful right now. The one downside to her is if you are forced to blow her 2 heals right away, she just kind of sits there for 2 turns sometimes and isn't able to do much, but she's still an absolute juggernaut. Now, A Momo is also a good budget pick, but I would say she falls behind the top three. I almost never saw A Momo at the top. That may be because I don't run control teams. Most people who still use A Momo at the high tiers mainly just built her like 300 effect resist and used her for cleansing. But there's so many debuffs now that really you want a full cleanser like Destina and Ray have supplanted her in that role because you really needed burst cleansing and Amomo doesn't have that. So she's kind of fallen off, but still very solid for PvE. But for RTA, I'd say you probably won't draft her all that much. And that's really it for the 3 stars. Obviously, I don't know much about Muse Rima, but the rest of them, you guys are going to be like, oh, I love my Captain Ricarus. Yeah, well, too bad. I've done 1,000 matches last season, and I saw him maybe twice, so he is not needed for RTA at all. So let's move on to the 4-star heroes now. So let's sort by grade here, and this is going to be a very short list. Out of the 4 stars, the ones that you might see occasionally at the high tiers, and even this is super rare, is Blue Rose. Blue Rose is probably relatively common. Some people love using Blue Rose. I would say not as much as last season, but she is drafted. Typically when she's drafted, she's really fast, and they'll draft it with like double DPS and just try to steamroll you with damage. She's kind of fallen off a bit with the way G-Purge is out now, and they're usually built fast and gives a team attack buff. But Rose is still a solid option. Acades also shows up occasionally, but she's more troll than anything else. I really only see her, and a lot of times she's built effect resist and she's just spamming cleanses. But if you draft a very low damage team, like I used to do that sometimes, and they would draft Acades into me, because if you don't have a team that puts out enough damage, Acades will just spam S2, S3 over and over, and essentially you can't kill anything. So I'm not going to say that she's popular or a must-have or anything. She isn't. But out of all the 4 stars in the game, once I got near High Champion, I'd say Blue Rose and Fire Acades. In terms of non-MLs, obviously the MLs don't count, but in terms of RGB 4-star units, those are literally the only 2 I saw. I never saw any of these other units. One time I saw Angelica and lost to it, but again, no one drafts Angelica, so don't even consider that. So I think that's it for the 4 stars. So now let's go to 5-star RGBs. So okay, this list is going to be a little bit bigger, and this is going to be a little bit more, I want to say, controversial, because I know 5-star units are generally better, and some of you guys are going to say, like, these heroes are really great and just don't know how to use them. I'm just going to tell you what showed up the most, okay? I'm not like, for example, Kisei is not going to make the list, but I did run into some Legend players that do draft Kisei. It's very rare, and it's usually just as a Ravi counter pick, but most 5-star units do have a place in the right draft. Like Cecilia, like Shuffles used to always draft this anytime I played him, but he was literally the only one doing that. So again, I'm talking about heroes that are common drafts. And when it comes to that, let's go through the list. Ravi. Ravi is definitely a very popular pick last season. On counter set, Crimson Seed, and the fact that her S1 can remove debuffs, she literally had solo potential, and she's the kind of hero where if you don't have an answer to her, she might solo your whole team. And if you watch my RTA videos, you'll see cases where I literally did that to people, like 1v4 solos with Ravi. So Ravi definitely stepped up this season. She's been huge. Let's see other top ones. Basar. Basar was a very popular 1 to 3 pick. I even saw some people first pick Basar, but if he wasn't first picked, he was a very popular 2-3. I mean, Basar's been king of PvP for ages, so nothing really changed there. So he's still extremely popular. Crow, if you have him, another must build, especially with the G Purge teams running around last season. Crow came back in a big way because if you tried to just AoE pummel someone down, Crow was there to delete someone on your team after that opener. So Crow actually became a pretty popular 2-3 pick last season. In the beginning of the season, I want to say I almost never ran into him, but near the end of the season, he was a very popular early pick. Some people even did like LR Crow into Crow. So definitely a very popular unit. And the ones I'm mentioning now, by the way, are priority heroes, ones that you're going to use all the time. Cerise, obviously huge, even if you're not cleaving, especially with General Purges. A lot of people drafted her as a counter to General Purges, and the fact that she has a stun and those guaranteed dual attacks, post buff, she's huge. And artifacts, they'll usually be on Guiding Light or the Elfelt one with the Death Break. Definitely a very big hero. What's next here? Rowana, this one might be a bit more controversial, but the thing is, she was such a hard counter to some very meta units last season. SSB, F10A, most people ran her on Stella Harpa, and those random dispels were very annoying. And even if they didn't have SSB or F10A, sometimes that big burst heal plus a 2-turn revive was enough to kind of let you win that match. So Rowana stepped up in a big way last season. Landy was just a juggernaut. I mean, she just does so much damage. She's a huge DPS threat, turn cycles like crazy, and the fact that she gives the entire team speed buff, that was also huge. So Landy, again, is a must build for high-end RTA, at least by last season's perspective. And then we're going to talk about SSB. She's still a god tier pick. Like everyone always assumes she fell off. She's still a very, very common pick at the high tiers. Just such a hard counter to so many teams, but she's usually a 4-5 pick because of Rowana. Or some people would pick SSB and Rowana together, but then that kind of sticks them for Rowana. But against the right team, SSB is a must ban, absolute powerhouse. And obviously, F10A was huge. I drafted her quite often. If they didn't take FCC, I very often took F10A to force them to ban her. I didn't even really like using her. But against no FCC teams, definitely a solid pickup, even with things like Delabet out. So in terms of RGB 5-star heroes, I think the ones I mentioned are the priorities. Those are the ones that I ran into the most, as in like one of those heroes showed up every single match. Now let's talk about second tier RGB heroes. Crayon, he fell off in a big way. Why? Because of Cerise and F10A and SSB and all these units that just neuter him. There's so many strips now, and Kayron, if his immunity falls off, he's just a joke. So Kayron fell off in a big way, but he was still a solid 4-5 pick if for whatever reason they picked a team with no dispels. So Kayron still has a place, but that place is far more limited. Like, he used to be a solid anti-cleave unit on counter set. The cleave units now have so many strips that you can't rely on his immunity sticking, so he's even kind of been bad in that role. Charles, no one uses anymore. I didn't see him once. Ken, I thought would be used more, but I didn't see him at all. None of those units I ever saw. DN. DN was a pocket pick. She fell off in a big way as well, probably because of a lot of the true damage like LR Crow and BMH, but she was a solid 4-5 pick if you felt that they were just turtling up and you wanted to beef up the offense. I did draft her a few times. Risky to use, especially if a lot of like the F10As and Basar, but as a 4-5 in the right opportune moment, she is still a solid pick. Pavel shows up occasionally, Vivian shows up occasionally, but I would say rare, pretty rare. Lily is still drafted pretty often, but I wouldn't say she's a priority anymore. She's kind of fallen off with like A-Raz competing for a similar role, but if you need a full cleanse, and her dual attacks are always solid to provoke, she's definitely still a solid second tier unit, and I drafted her all the time, but I would say I'm one of the few people who did. I'd say a lot of other players rarely drafted her. Alencia fell off in a big way, but she's still okay to use. Um, Where's Destina? Destina popped off in a big way. If they drafted any more than 2 control units, Destina was a huge hard counter to them because she's impossible to kill. That CR bump when she cleanses plus the enormous heal, she was actually very bestial there. And Holiday Yafine, not too many people have her built, but I want to say she messed up a lot of my drafts, the players who did have her built. Hard counters Basar, and the thing was, she's also pretty solid against S10A. So if I picked Basar and S10A picked Holiday Yafine, she almost ended up being a must ban, and that kind of let them get something else through that I didn't want to deal with. So as a pocket pick, she was pretty solid. And in terms of RGBs, I would say those are the units I ran into. Like things like Dizzy, where they used to be very powerful. I literally just never saw them. I never saw them. So maybe I didn't mention your favorite hero, but straight up, I never saw them. No one's using them. So it doesn't mean that they're bad, but they're certainly not meta. Now, last but not least, let's talk about, of course, the MLs. The short answer to the MLs is build every single one you have because almost all of them, especially the ML5s, have a place. But again, we're going to talk about priorities, units that are drafted almost every single match, and then we'll get into lower priority units. So priorities. LR Crow. If he wasn't pre-banned, he was in 100% of matches, guaranteed. You need to build him, he is busted. FCC, same thing. If not pre-banned, drafted 100% of the time. Just that strong. If you have her, lucky enough to have her, build her. General Purges, also almost always pre-banned or drafted. You have to build him PvP though, and doesn't really work on Wyvern, so I switched mine back because it's the start of the season. But definitely a very meta unit last season. We'll see if he keeps his place this season, but it was definitely a very high priority pick. Arbiter Vildred, obviously still a must pick. Most people I noticed went Degen RB because, especially if they didn't have Blood Moon Haste and Tomoka. If they did have Blood Moon Haste, a lot of times they just drafted it together and kept them speed. Speed was pretty risky though, unless you 4-5 picked him, because if they had Blood Moon Haste or something, you started running into must-ban situations. But, Basket RB, always going to be a nightmare for someone. S10A, also a hero that is drafted almost every single match. She just hits so freaking hard, has the stun, decent counter to speed Arby's because she can burn, kill him, and then S3 to finish him off. Just a very, very powerful unit. A Tywin, toxic hero. I'm so pissed I don't have him, but a lot of top players abuse the crap out of him. With the soul burn, he can literally use it every other turn, and it just becomes a toxic speed cycling stun fest with decreased speed. Definitely a must build. And I think those are the absolute priority ML5s in the sense that they're going to be drafted every single match. Now let's move on to the second tier, but really, pretty much every ML in this game has a use. LQC, with G-Purge, got drafted pretty common at the top because she was used to smash through FCC teams. Briarwitch, a lot of people would stack Basar and Briarwitch together to make sure the unbuffable lands, so that was pretty common. Flitica, if you're a cleaver, so I'm just going to skip through Flitica, Opsig, and Alots. The cleaving game was very weak this season, but if you do want to cleave, those were the 3 units that usually did it, but I'm not going to talk about them because I didn't run into many cleavers. Rylot, Tomoka, solid second tier units. I actually hate dealing with Rylot, but I gotta say I didn't run into him very often. I think it's because probably players who use him get sick of him just randomly getting gibbed in the opener. It's kind of RNG-ish, and you'll lose a lot of points if that happens. I think that's why he fell out of favor, because there were a lot of games where I just pick RB, and in the opener I gat and just one-shot the Rylot, and I'm just like, lol, easy win. Tomoka, hard counter to RB, except most RBs went degen. Delabet, I think she kind of is okay in very situational picks, but the way her S3 works, a lot of times she doesn't cleanse at the right moment. Shamsi, solid counter to debuff teams. Oh, Sage Ball, I forgot to mention. He definitely goes on a priority list. Not too many people had him built, luckily, but if you do, he was definitely a top pick. So he goes in that prior section. A Ravi, solid second tier pick. A Kohli, solid pocket pick. BMH, he's in between second tier and priority. If they have any reviver, he's a must pick. He's huge. ML Ken blows now, but you can occasionally draft him against the right team. Ruel is solid second pick to borderline priority. Depends on how you want to play. If they pick the low damage draft and you want to stall it out, still good. T Surin still solid, but harder to draft. There's a lot of teams that counter her. D Corv I never saw drafted. Too easy to control. Made Chloe I saw a few times, but I won every time. DJ Basar I'm interested to see what happens this season with the buffs, but never saw him. Crescent Moon Rin, the only ML4 I don't have. Occasional pocket pick, same with Clarissa, but still so rare that you don't have to care about it. Fighter Maya I like, but definitely a pocket pick. Spez I think is pretty bad still, but some players like Deity did love using it. Usually, like I would sometimes lose to it because I got surprised by the draft, but in general, if you see it coming, pretty easy to deal with. And the rest of these almost never see. Again, Watcher Shuri, you're not going to use it unless you're cleaving. So anyways, I hope that covers all the heroes. So I hope that gives you a quick rundown, no BS, of what heroes are good at RTA, at least right now. Who knows how the meta will change. And again, I know I might not have mentioned some of your favorite heroes, but if I didn't mention them, it's not because I quote-unquote think they're terrible or useless or something. This list is not so much my opinion, but literally me cataloging from my memory the heroes I actually ran into last season being in top 300-400 champion RTA. If I didn't mention them, it's simply because of the fact that no one was picking them. It's not that I think they're terrible, it's just no one was picking them. And in a way, that probably does mean they're terrible, because if the best players in the game are never drafting something, these players who love to experiment and try new things, it's a good chance that they tried it and they failed and they decided it wasn't good enough. So anyways, let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. I'm doing this in lieu of an official quote-unquote tier list. I hope this guys helped you out in terms of deciding what to build if you are interested in testing the waters in RTA. And I hope you enjoyed. Till next time, boys, peace out.